Hi, my name is Henry Benito, and I'll be answering a few questions for my psychology midterm. The first question is define psychology, including the origins of psychology, the name of the founding father of psychology, the location of the world's first scientific laboratory, William James, and functionalism. So, psychology is the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. This means psychologists study what people do, why they do it, how they do it, basically people's actions and what goes on in their minds, their emotions, their motivations, their thinking, how they feel, all that stuff. So the word psychology comes from the Greek root psyche, meaning mind or soul, and logos, meaning study of. Psychology can be traced back to ancient Greece through philosophers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, asking questions about how the mind works and what causes these behaviors. It can be traced back to philosophy and biology too. Early physiologists studied the brain and nervous system. These two fields eventually merged to create psychology as a science as we know it today. So the founding father of psychology is Wilhelm Wundt. It was Psychology was first recognized as a science in 1879 when Wilhelm Wundt opened his first psychology laboratory at the University of Leipzig in Germany. He wanted to measure consciousness in a scientific way. Things like how long it took to process a sound or image. He used to provide his subjects with certain stimuli, certain sounds, certain images, and see how they'd react to it. So maybe a harsh sound and an ugly image, and see how their brain would process it. This method was called introspection. He asked people to describe what they thought about it and how they felt about it in great detail, and he would uh, base his studies based off that. This approach became known as structuralism, which focused on breaking mental processes down into basic components, the same way chemists break down different elements or substances into separate elements in their little chemistry experiments. While Wundt was opening up his first psychology laboratory in 1879, a year later in 1890, William James published his Principles of Psychology, which became the framework for functionalism. William James was a American psychologist, by the way. His idea of functionalism focused on how the mind processes things to adapt to its environment. He didn't ask what the mind is, he asked what the mind does. His approach was influenced by Charles Darwin and his theory of evolution. He believed that mental processes evolved in the same way to serve for a survival purpose. So Darwin's theory of evolution basically believed that the survival of the fittest, the people, the animals that evolved can survive. So in 1879, Wilhelm Wundt, the founder of psychology, established his first lab and created his theory of structuralism. In 1890, William James in America published his Principles of Psychology, which became the basis of functionalism, heavily influenced by Darwin and his theory of evolution. And in the 1900s, psychology was expanded even more into behaviorism, psychoanalysis, humanism, and cognitive psychology. So psychology began as a blend of philosophy and science. Philosophers like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and scientists like Wundt. And it was shaped by Wundt's experimental approach and evolved through James' functional focus. This created the field of psychology as we know it today. It studies both the structure and purpose of the human thought and behavior. So psychology basically studies why humans think a certain way, why they behave a certain way, and it can be studied in a objective way, the same way that Wundt was trying to do it back in 1879. Nowadays, there's many different psychological studies about certain maybe medications causing certain effects in the brain, and also certain scenarios like maybe grief causing depression or suicide even. So that's me answering the first question. The next question I'll be answering is question 3, which is define the scientific method. Include the 4 general steps that go along with the scientific method and summarize each of these steps. In your discussion of the scientific method, you must include some study methods such as the case study method, the survey method, naturalistic observation method, or the correlation method. The scientific method is the foundation of psychology because it helps researchers test ideas in a clear and organized way. As I discussed earlier, Wilhelm Wundt, in his laboratory at the University of Leipzig, was definitely using the scientific method. It's a process that helps ensure that our conclusions are based on evidence, not opinion or guesswork, and also that they're replicable. These are the 4 steps for the scientific method. So the first step is to observe and ask a question. Researchers notice something interesting or puzzling about behavior. Maybe they'll notice a certain pattern, certain correlations, and they'll put it together and form a hypothesis. So step 2 is actually to form a hypothesis, which is a testable prediction about a relationship between 2 variables. For example, students who listen to instrumental music when they study are going to do better on tests. That's one example of a hypothesis. So one way you could test that hypothesis is by establishing a control group, having one of them, having one group listen to music before a test, having the other group just study in silence. Which leads me into step 3, which is to test hypothesis. This is where you collect the data. Psychologists use various methods, such as experiments, case studies, surveys, observation, or correlational studies. So case studies focus deeply on a person or a small group and used for smaller, less like probably lower budget studies. Surveys are able to gather a lot of data quick, but the problem is there could be some dishonesty in the survey. Naturalistic observation involves watching people's behavior in real settings. So, example, the Stanford prison experiment. I think this is the best way because there's no way to like fudge it. Like you can't like skew the results in a certain way because it's just what's happening. Correlational method, how measures how 2 variables relate to each other without proving cause and effect. This is another good method too. It's almost as good as naturalistic observation. And these experiments are manipulating different variables to find different correlations. So in the experimental method, the researchers divide participants into different groups, change one variable, as I said, the music, for example, and measure its effect on one another. So after they take their test, for example, they're going to look at the grades from the non-music group and then look at the grades from the music group and then see who did better. And then I guess if the control group, the groups are big enough, then it can be determined that the students that scored better, that's the better way to study. This helps ensure that the conclusions made from the experiment are based on evidence, not bias or just chance. So step 4 of the scientific method is to analyze the data and draw conclusions. So if the results support the hypothesis, the researchers might share their findings in scientific journals and publish it so others can repeat that study and see if they get the same results. So basically, to finish things off, the scientific method gives psychology credibility as a science. Without the scientific method, an experiment is just oh, let's see what's going on. It provides a systematic step-by-step guide in how to ask the questions, create your hypothesis, gather evidence, build knowledge, and eventually publish it. And this tells us a lot about how humans think and behave from the results. That's question 3. Thank you. Next, I'll be answering question 7, which is explain the difference between sensation and perception. Define the following basic terms in sensation: absolute indifference thresholds, signal detection theory, and stimulus adaptation. Make sure you define both sensation and perception. Describe and define Weber's law. So sensation and perception are very different. Sensation is the things you sense, your 5 senses: taste, touch, smell, hear. Probably forgetting one, but sensation is the process by which our sensory organs detect stimuli, like light, sound, or touch, and it sends that information to the brain. Once it is sent to the brain, that is what perception is. Perception is how you see things, how you, like, let's say someone farts, it smells bad. Let's say you eat some food, it's too seasoned, oh, it's too salty. Those are perceptions. Perception is how our brain organizes and interprets the sensory information into meaningful experiences. For example, when light enters your eye, that's sensation. The light going in your eye is a sensation. Your brain recognizing that light as someone's face is the perception. So I'm going to talk about some key terms that were laid out in the question. The absolute threshold is the smallest amount of stimulus energy a person can detect half the time. For example, the quietest sound you can hear or the faintest of light you can see on a dark night. So basically the absolute threshold is something you could barely perceive, something you barely notice. The difference threshold is just the smallest change in a stimulus that can be detected. For example, when someone turns the TV up and you notice the change in the new volume from the old volume, or someone maybe gets a haircut and you're like, oh, your hair's shorter now. Next, I'll be talking about signal detection theory. Signal detection theory explains how we decide whether we've detected a stimulus, especially when it's barely anything or uncertain. It depends not only on the strength of the signal, but also on your psychological state. For example, someone with schizophrenia is not going to see the same things as someone without it. Like, they're going to see random things. Yeah. So another example is, for instance, a new parent hearing their baby crying in another room, but they don't hear like their alarm clock going off. Basically, selective hearing. Stimulus adaptation happens when our sensory receptors become less sensitive after being exposed to the same stimulus for a while. For example, people that develop a tolerance to alcohol or different like melatonin, and or you get an ice bath and it's freezing at first, but once you're in there for a couple minutes, it's calmed down. Finally, I'll be talking about Weber's law. Weber's law states that the difference threshold is a constant proportion of the original stimulus. This means that if you're lifting a 25-pound weight, you might notice a difference if another pound is added. But if you're lifting 100 pounds, you might need to add like 10, 15 pounds to notice the same change. So together, our sensation provides us with our perception. Without senses, there's no perception. And without perception, we aren't able to interpret the senses. And we aren't able to interpret the world around us. Like, for example, you sense a car's coming because you hear it, you feel the wind, passing. Your mind interprets that, and you get out of the road so you don't get hit by the car. These sensation and perception are both necessary for survival, and they're extremely important. We have to be able to trust our senses. For example, people that lose like their vision have a heightened sense of hearing because it has to make up for what they lost when they lost their vision. But sometimes we can also misinterpret those sensations and create incorrect perceptions based off that. So we need these to work together in order to perceive our surroundings and survive. Finally, for my last question, I'll be answering question 8, which is explain how the sleep-wake cycle is regulated. Describe the characteristics of each stage of sleep and the brainwave patterns associated with each stage. Explain why we sleep. Explain why we dream. Evaluate the effects of sleep deprivation. Identify and describe different types of sleep-wake disorders. So the sleep-wake cycle is regulated by both biological and environmental factors. Certain biological factors like like if you weigh more, you might have less energy, so you're going to sleep more. And different environmental factors like the people that live in the northern hemisphere that have less sunlight in the day, so their body's gonna cause them to sleep more, and they might develop seasonal depression due to that. Our bodies follow a 24-hour cycle called the circadian rhythm, and it's controlled by our brain in the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the hypothalamus. The suprachiasmatic nucleus responds to light and darkness, which signals when it's time to be awake or sleep. Growing up, my family always told me it's bad to sleep during the day, and I didn't know why, but after looking at this, it's because our bodies sleep better when it's nighttime, and it can really throw off your circadian rhythm if you don't get the proper amount of sleep during the night. And another reason we need to be asleep at night is that when it gets dark, the brain releases melatonin, which makes us sleepy. And when it's light, when the sun comes up, your melatonin levels drop and we wake up. Next, I'll be talking about the several different stages of sleep and their brainwave patterns. So stage 1 is light sleep, which is the transition from wakefulness to sleep. In this stage, your brainwaves slow down. You may experience brief muscle twitches like that or something while you're sleeping, but you're not really asleep. You could be woken up very easily. This is you transitioning from being awake to going to bed. Stage 2 is the deeper relaxation stage. Your body temperature lowers, your heart rate slows. This is your body basically getting ready to sleep. Stage 3 is deep sleep, which is also called slow wave sleep. This stage restores your muscles, it restores your tissues, it strengthens your immune system. This is why sleep is so important, because athletes specifically are more susceptible to injury when they've had less sleep. There's studies based on that. And the last stage is REM sleep, which stands for rapid eye movement. This is where your brain activity increases, which causes you to dream, and your body becomes temporarily paralyzed to prevent basically sleepwalking. REM sleep is vital for memory, learning, and emotional processing. So REM sleep is where your eyes, you basically, your eyes are moving, but your eyelids are shut. Throughout the night, we cycle through these stages about 4 to 6 times. And as the night goes, your REM sleep periods last longer, and while the deep sleep is decreasing. So sleep serves many important functions. It restores your energy, it helps your brain process information, and it regulates your mood. Everyone's been cranky when they're tired. It's a pretty common thing. Lack of sleep or sleep deprivation can cause irritability, poor concentration, weaken immunity, and increased risk of accidents. They say driving tired is actually worse than driving drunk. And as I said earlier, athletes need sleep for their body to recover and to prevent injuries, because injuries come a lot of times because of fatigue. There are also several sleep disorders that I'll be talking about. The first one is insomnia, which is difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep. So this is like, oh, if you can't go to sleep, you're up all night, or you just wake up. Sleep apnea, which is bad, it involves your pauses in breathing during sleep. So these people have to wear oxygen masks in order to breathe properly while they're sleeping. Another one is narcolepsy, which causes sudden sleep attacks during the day. And this means someone could just fall asleep out of nowhere. And the last one is night terrors, which happen mostly in deep sleep. This causes uh, a lot of fear, and you don't even remember it. So to summarize this question, the sleep-wake cycle is essential for both physical and mental health. Physical and mental health. Our brains and bodies rely on this rhythm to stay balanced, alert, and emotionally stable. Thank you.